Hello, friends, and welcome back to the podcast. In Ireland in 2023, we find ourselves in a deepening housing crisis that means less people than ever can afford to finance their own home, let alone achieve joyful and sustainable life. It's easy to forget that we once had the skills and resources and sense of community to feel confident in addressing these kinds of challenges. Perhaps easier to believe that we have lost them forever. Common Knowledge is a non-profit organisation based in County Clare committed to helping people refamiliarise themselves with such skills while empowering the community to play a more hands-on role in their own living arrangement. Spider Hickman is a co-founder of Common Knowledge and program director. Originally thinking that architecture was her path, she diverted to contemporary art, then residential development before finding her happy place back on site, this time with tools in her hand. As well as teaching as part of the core crew in Common Knowledge, Spider manages course development and communications. This conversation covers Spider's journey, which is a real journey, to ending up with Common Knowledge. What exactly do Common Knowledge do? We talk about tiny houses, and I'm confident I'm not the only one that has considered a tiny house over the last few years. We also spend some time reflecting on the collective shift towards wanting a more sustainable living situation that we can contribute towards ourselves. As someone who is far from handy, this served as an uplifting and inspiring discussion, which has reshaped my belief on what I could do in the midst of a cost of living and housing crisis to aid my own living situation. I truly hope that it does the same for you. Common Knowledge is running courses almost non-stop over the next 5 months or so. Please see the link below for more information about their courses and dates, etc. And also, if you are somewhat handy and interested in volunteering with the guys, please drop them an email, which you'll find through the link below. As always, thanks a million. All the best. Spider Hickman, welcome to the podcast. Thanks for making time for us. What's the crack? How are you keeping?
Thanks so much for having me.
No, once I came across our common knowledge, I was initially appealed for somewhat obvious reasons, in the fact that a lot of people in Ireland are experiencing the negative consequences of the housing crisis, of the renting crisis, and it seemed like a really kind of wholesome, wholesome alternative and wholesome solution to what a lot of people are struggling with at the moment. So I'm really glad that I reached out to you. I'm really glad that you got back. And before we get into our common knowledge a bit more, um, I want to learn a bit more about Spider Hickman. So, can you tell us a bit about yourself?
Sure. Um, so I was actually born and brought up in London, and uh,
Okay.
and to be honest, I don't actually have any kind of ties to Ireland. So it's a
Okay.
funny old journey that I ended up moving there, um, which again was one of those
Hmm.
funny stories where you kind of think you're going for a couple of weeks and end up staying for a lot longer. And uh, yeah, no, I mean, London was, I was brought up in the 80s and sort of early 90s, and London was a very different place than it is now. And it's somewhere that I don't really recognize when I go back so much, of just like how busy and how hectic and how expensive it is. I still think it's an amazing city, but it's become a really hard place for people to live, and it's crowded. And
Hmm.
I kind of
Mm-hmm.
went through all sorts of sort of, you know, careers like we all do. Well, some of us do in our 20s,
Mm-hmm.
and tried out all sorts of things. I worked for an art gallery for a bit. I actually had originally trained to be an architect, but not a qualified one. And then I kind of was working in property in like real estate, but it was more sort of doing project management of small scale stuff. But I was doing a degree in real estate, which was quite soul destroying because, well, for all the obvious reasons that the emphasis was about like, how much money you can make from every square foot of anywhere. And when I'd been studying architecture, my whole like my sort of undergrad dissertation had been about like green architecture in London. And there was like a little like sideline
Okay.
about that in there. And there was like a tiny little thing about design. And it just felt so incongruous that like those are just things that no one was paying attention to. And as I was writing my dissertation for this master's, I was writing it about sustainable technology and social housing. And just as I'd written it,
Okay.
there was a huge fire in London in Grenfell Tower, and one
Oh,
of
yeah.
their
Yeah.
points of putting the cladding on the outside of this tower block in Notting Hill was about making it more thermolatively insulative. And they're still going on to this day of discussing who's to blame, who's at fault, the council, everything. And it's going to be a long, old, like court case, but 80 people plus died. And I think that was like my moment of, I don't know if I can swear, but like, fuck this. Like, I'm done. And
You can swear it's fine.
oh, great. Well, that's great. Phew. And, and I guess at that moment was when I was like, I also I'd recently, whilst I was doing this master's, been told that I have ADHD, which was also kind of one of these kind of moments where
Okay.
like, okay, well, this like explains a lot about what I've found like tricky in so many things. And I decided I was like, I need to go and like do something hands on. So I signed up to do this course with a company in America called Earthship Biotecture, where they build totally like they're called like radically off-grid buildings, and they're made out of tires and glass bottles and tin cans, and it's sort of 60% recycled materials in order to make these off-grid buildings.
Wow.
And as the story, which I realize is very common, not just with Earthship, but in this part of America called Taos in New Mexico, a lot of people kind of arrive thinking they'll be there for a couple of weeks, and it months turns into years. And the exact thing happened to me. And it was just one of those things of just suddenly meeting a whole bunch of people who were doing something. It was working with your hands rather than what I was finding really depressing, sitting behind a computer, and rather than just like theorizing on stuff, it was actually putting things into action. So I then spent several years building earthships all over the world, from Uruguay and Argentina to Japan, Australia, Puerto Rico, and yeah, it was amazing. Uh, and then obviously lockdown happened, and that put a stop to it all. However, I have a very good friend from Earthship, who is Harrison Gardner, who is another co-founder for Common Knowledge. And Harrison fell in love with an Irish woman. So that's how he found himself in Ireland, because he's Australian. And I'd come over to visit them
Okay.
quite a few times beforehand, but it wasn't until he started running these courses of teaching people how to build uh, that he then asked me to come and teach as well. And that happened the year before last. And then this year, I've been out for 7 months living and teaching and starting to understand the west coast of Ireland. And now I'm going to be back for again in spring. So it's just it's interesting where life takes you from a couple of bits and pieces, really, isn't it?
Yeah, it's always beautiful to hear when like someone just follows a passion or someone follows something that's really true to them with no kind of plan per se and just sees what happens. I one thing I wanted to ask was before you made the trip
Yeah,
to New Mexico, had you any experience with building with using your hands like you said?
I think I'd never directly built, but I think I have like this weird thing in my head because I've never been scared of tools. I've never been scared of workshops. I've never
Okay.
felt like they were out of bounds. I went to an art school that had a workshop that had metalworks, had woodworking, everything. And I guess I was a bit of a tomboy when I was younger, so I never I always enjoy kind of getting messy and playing with, you know, the soil and with worms. And um, I was always kind of quite outdoors and sort of had scrapes on
Okay.
my knees and probably on my face from falling over and stuff. So I guess the idea of building, because of between making things and mm, having spent quite a lot of time on building sites, just generally as a child, like going around with my father, I didn't find them intimidating places.
Okay.
I think also because I'm tall, I'm like 6 foot. I think physically, I never felt intimidated by how like machinery or materials could be like not meant for me, because I think this is where ergonomically tools are made for men, and so they really do exclude women from strength and like proportion. And I guess that using tools never felt like a weird thing for me because I was the right size, I guess.
I get you.
Um,
Interesting. And when you made the move over to New Mexico and to kind of dive into this world of building with renewable renewable or reusable materials, were there a lot of other women? Like, was it, yeah, talk to
yeah,
me through that experience.
yeah, and I think that was it. I remember it really clearly actually that the first day I arrived, it was freezing cold. It was December in New Mexico, which is is freezing. Basically, it's really high altitude, so everyone was like wearing their woolly hats, scarves, like goggles, because it's also really bright sunshine, and so you can't determine like men from women. It was just a kind of free for all, and we were pouring. There was actually a cement truck, so they were pouring a bond beam, and we were all being told to, well, being asked to like agitate the cement into this bond beam all around the top of this berm of tires. And we'd been told at the beginning, anyone who was a bit cold or they just weren't enjoying it, they could go and work on another project and start learning how to do some of the interiors of doing like tiling and doing some plastering and stuff. And I remember being quite determined. I was like, I want to stay outside. I want to like learn how to actually build. Like I felt like that was like real building rather than just doing interiors. And when eventually we finished
Hmm.
this job and everyone sort of revealed sort of a little bit more of their faces after it sort of warmed up a bit, I realized I was actually the only woman on that job site. And initially I was a bit kind of intimidated, but thought, okay, cool. Like this is like it doesn't phase me. It's not that's fine. But what I then loved was then joining the other group later on, a couple of weeks later, and there was the coolest carpenter called Jen, and she's Canadian, and she started training to be a carpenter from the age of like, you know, late teens, and she was like a badass. And then there was this other, um, there's another girl, and she is a welder and like a brilliant um, builder as well. And the two of them were on the crew teaching
Hmm.
all of us how to build. And they were just awesome. And I guess that they were the two that I found really inspiring because I think there's something about, uh, and I now recognize it the more experienced I've become. There's something really empowering about wanting other women to build as well and realize it's not out of your remit. That I can acknowledge that I'm tall and
Mm.
strong, but actually, whenever any woman comes on the course and seeing that there's a kind of intimidation at the beginning and how empowering using tools in a space of like 24 hours, you know, someone suddenly able to use an impact driver and they can be up a ladder, you know, attaching, you know, the roof structure to the walls. And it's really cool because it's dismissing all these age old things of, you know, this role is for a man and this role is for a woman, and let's get all the men to build and let's the women can just sort of stay down and do like the less, you know, the less dangerous stuff. Uh, and I think
Mm.
in America and in Canada, I think there is a bit, and Australia actually, there's a bit more of a gung ho attitude of. I think there's sort of more of an out. There's a sort of the women that I met there. There were women who do all women builds and have all women communities, and it's not saying that they're feminists and they hate men and they. It's just saying that they're able to realize that they don't have to stick to their roles that a lot of us have been told as
Yeah.
we're growing up to stick to. And
Hmm.
it's really
Hmm.
interesting in the introductions that we have for all our courses at Common Knowledge, the amount of women in Ireland who say that when they were growing up, they were not invited into the workshop with their fathers or grandfathers. Their brothers and cousins were, but they were kind of ushered into the
Mm.
kitchen. And so when I say that I felt really comfortable going onto a building site, it's because I hung out with my dad when he was playing with, like, he had an old car that he'd sort of be underneath the engine of, and I'd pass some tools. It was something that I was allowed to be in that zone and encouraged to learn stuff. Whereas I think in Ireland, and this is obviously a huge generalization, a lot of the women that we have met haven't been encouraged to feel like that. And so
Oh, you're right.
it's really exciting seeing how people then like, okay, you know what? I now feel like I can have these conversations with builders if I'm doing up something, or you know, there might be this image of like some strong man holding one piece of wood, but actually two women can hold the same piece of wood. You might need more people or find out clever ways of how to move things around, but you don't have to have brute strength in order to build. You just have to be a little bit more ingenious about the ways you go about it.
It's interesting you saying that because it sounds counterintuitive, or it sounds just, of course it involves this, or of course it involves that, but that's, like you said, that's because probably there's an industry where there's tools built and constructed primarily for men, for the male body, for the male strength, but actually we can design similar buildings and similar structures if with just a different approach so that women can get involved as well.
Yeah,
It's uh,
yeah. So how
it's
did
it's
you?
uplifting.
I was curious. How did you find out about common knowledge?
So a friend of my girlfriend had volunteered with Common Knowledge, and if I remember, she told my girlfriend about her experience down in Clare,
Okay,
and because she was also interested in tiny homes,
okay,
and I had subsequently then learned about tiny homes. And then my girlfriend was like, well, there's this collective and they're even teaching people how to build tiny homes, as well as selling tiny homes.
yeah,
And then I said, oh, this sounds very interesting. And like you said, in Ireland, we're usually a bit behind these kind of movements that happen in the States and in Australia. But yeah, I guess I want to, because you're doing a better job than me, uh, kind of explore common knowledge for people who are just hearing about it for the first time now. So probably so far people are hearing that they provide workshops on how to build tiny homes and other structures. But
yeah,
I guess why I was drawn to it is that because it's also more, right? There's also a really um, deeply ingrained aspect of community there, which I think is kind of slipping away in our culture.
yeah. Well, I think this is where um, Harrison started doing these. He's a builder, and he started
Hmm.
building doing these buildings and these courses because he had friends who were interested. And then it realized we did two projects in 2021.
Hmm.
One with Home Tree, who are
Okay.
also based in Clare, and
Okay.
this whole idea of mehel, which obviously is an Irish word of community and building, and the whole community coming together to build. And
Mm-hmm.
there's something so beautiful about that. And
Mm,
um, and there were stories of back when a couple would be newly married, and the people of the community would come together, and they all kind of knew their role of how to then uh, build a house for a new couple. And it's amazing that that would have been, and
mm,
that's kind of how it should be, really, isn't it? It's sort of everyone should have a home, and everyone should be have access to food, as human beings on a planet. Like our whole, it's so wrong of how in like disproportionate everything is between people who are able to have
mm-hmm.
several houses and some people who are struggling to have one, and the safety of that. And I guess what common knowledge is it's it was just build school, and it's now become common knowledge because it's about sharing so many skills that not
Yeah,
and primarily there's a lot of builders at the moment, but what we're hoping to grow into is for it to have all the kind of skills that we all need in life. And that's building, but that's making and mending and growing. And I mean, there are so many other things that are sort of subtopics of those four main things, but it's using different types of materials that we're interested in. It's bringing people together to share the knowledge, because we don't do that. There's so much information that now has to be monetized, and
yeah.
um and people are being want to hold close to their chest so that they don't want to share what they know. And I guess that's where we are in the world at the moment. And um
Yeah.
and I guess what common knowledge is trying to do is just trying to make a base for those conversations to happen, and to pick up skills that will make their life more sustainable, so they're able to mend things, they're able to make things, they don't have to buy something that's made on the other side of the world, that they can learn how to grow. And I think it's also just, even if those skills aren't necessarily put into practice, it's not that you have to go to build school and then you have to build your own house. Some people come and they learn that they can then put up shelves by themselves, or they then know how to make their own table. Some people just want to be able to do it, so they've got the the confidence to have conversations with building professionals. So when they do up their house or do build their house, they're able to understand what's being said rather than just saying yes blindly to a whole bunch of stuff when they don't
Yeah.
actually know what all those layers of construction are. Um,
Which is very
so yeah,
empowering.
yeah, and I guess that's with what we're all trying to do, is trying to demystify something, or a world that doesn't need to be quite so complicated.
Mystical.
Yeah, yeah, exactly. Exactly.
And, and for people listening, then, could you like paint a bit of a picture at what to expect if they were to rock up in County Clare at the base of common knowledge? What would
Mm.
they see? What would an average
Well,
day look like?
it's a good question, because next year, even I don't know what that's going to look like, because
Okay.
last year we've been running out of two of our co-founders' home, and we are now in the process of buying, maybe you've heard of it before, but the Bog Hill Centre, which is in the Burren, and it's
Hmm.
always been a kind of retreat center, and it's amazing. It's already got these beautiful hexagonal buildings, and it's got somewhere for people to stay, and um, there's two kind of earth buildings. It's been built over the last kind of 30, 40 years, and we're going to be running all our courses from there. And it feels really great that we're actually going to be able to house people. There's going to be a proper commercial kitchen there, and we're now finding ourselves a home, and it's quite good when we're preaching about a home and what a home is, and what does home look like for people, and trying to kind of discuss what how that is different for everyone. That now common knowledge itself can have a home that people know where to go to to try and start entering into that conversation.
Mm.
So this year we had an emphasis on tiny homes, and next year we won't be doing tiny homes again. And we're
Okay.
currently, and it's not because we don't like tiny homes. It's just more the fact that we don't want to be pigeonholed as the tiny home company. You know,
Okay.
the the drawings and the for that are are readily available for anyone to build. So if they want to use those drawings, they're for free and anyone can build them. And so at the moment, next year, we're now in discussion of what our next projects are going to be because we did a stone renovation course last year as well uh, on the property. And there were so many people who are interested in that. We also did an extension to a house. And I guess like there are so many different things that people are looking to do. In essence, what's being taught in the course is it can be applied to anything. So whether you're building a chicken coop or a tiny home or an extension, the the way that you go about it are still the same things. And
I-
it's still having to understand about a foundation and load and understanding how and why we wrap a building in the way that we do it to make it waterproof. Um, and and I guess that's kind of what build school is. It's about learning how to use the tools and it's understanding the physics that we kind of already know, but not just from school. I think there's something instinctive within humans that we already understand how to build. And this is, a child making a den or, you know, it's just something that we've kind of watched and learned and played around with of how to put Lego together or, you know,
Mm.
and played around
Mm-hmm.
with. We kind of already have done our trial and error of why things hold up and why things fall down. And I guess this is where we slowly go through each layer of building anything so that anyone can replicate that and just understand at each level why you do things in the order that it's done.
I love the sound of it. Even for someone like myself who is probably would be described by other people as very incapable in this realm of building and knowing loads and tools. It appeals to me. I think it also appeals to me, and it might also for some listeners, because sometimes when we picture ourselves in a scenario of building or construction, that we often, sometimes, well, I know I do, kind of imagine an environment that isn't, completely open to you making errors and
Mm,
forgiving of those errors. You know what I mean? And I think why I liked the common knowledge approach is that it's kind of calm. We're here together. We're going to learn together. Where people are coming from all next of the woods, all different backgrounds, and yeah, we're going to make mistakes, but it's an environment where yeah, we've accepted that we're going to make mistakes, and that's actually going to help us in the learning process compared to someone who, like for myself, would be a little insecure maybe about my ability, and then if I make one mistake or I make two mistakes, and there's some judgment by people who know much more than me in that area, then I'll be like, all right, well, it's just not for me.
yeah.
I'll leave it. So
Well,
I
I mean,
think.
then that makes me want to say, well, then you definitely have to come on a course next year then. Um, but uh, but I think that's kind of. I was having a conversation with one of our board members today, and we were just
Hmm.
talking about that exact thing of the personality of common knowledge is exactly that. It's about being able to be. You're permitted to make mistakes, and I think this is where this is the whole point of why children need to make mistakes to learn. They need to sort of understand what's dangerous before they realize maybe you shouldn't do that again. And I'm not saying that we should
Hmm.
there should not be any health and safety in the world. But I think there is. I I'm slightly worried about a generation of children not um, not being allowed to think for themselves or discover for themselves like what's safe and what's not.
Yeah.
Of climbing a tree
Yeah.
and and realizing quite like how far you can push yourself. And I kind
Mm.
of see when we're all on a building site, and I personally feel this as well. It's sort of I kind of feel like I'm on a on like a jungle gym. Like I feel like it's all part of um you might be up a ladder and you're reaching for something and it's kind of just working out like what can you do and what are you comfortable doing? And no one should be pushed into doing something they're not comfortable with. But it's also about all the
Hmm.
conversations that you have with other people of understanding what their level is of their knowledge or experience and everyone kind of working to that. But also there's this really lovely layer of encouragement of it's not just the best the people who are the best should be doing it. It's that it's everyone's involved. Everyone's allowed to do it. And it's a conversation to try and not make mistakes, but if they do happen, no one's to blame. It's just about
Yeah.
undoing it and trying it a way in a different way. And I think it's really important that we do that because I could bang on about sort of the education system and how much I despise the fact that we're all vetted against each other and a school system of results and stuff. And I think there's so much that's making us compete against each other. And I think
Yeah.
what it just ending up with a whole bunch of really anxious, you know, adults who are all don't who are
Yeah.
also scared to acknowledge when they haven't done something properly or correctly or on time or something, when it's actually like if everyone was able to talk about what was holding them back or what they're having problems with in any kind of like work, family, relationship, friendship role, then we'd all feel so much more supported. We'd probably be way more productive rather than having people nervously sitting at home or in the office or whatever it is, feeling like they're not capable of doing something when actually they are. It's just they need a bit of help, and I think that's where we just all need
Yeah.
to be a bit more forgiving.
Yeah. You speaking like this reminds me of we had a conversation on the importance of play at the start of this year, and
Mm,
our guest was talking about how our the things that we learn during play are the things that we take forward with us in workplaces, in schools, in our communities, and that if that time is taken from us or is like overly supervised, that we're not being able to flex those even the social muscles that you said, instead of
mm,
looking at someone and saying they're not as good as me at this, you can
yeah,
look at them and say, oh, okay, well, because they're not as good as this, they can do this instead, or they can help me with that, or they can help us with this. And yeah, like we've been starved of it, right? And there's
yeah,
I even think like my generation are not particularly, I mean, I don't want to speak for a generation, but I do think that we we lack that I mean, I've never heard someone describe the building site as a jungle gym, but we lack the kind of to see the play in work, in these
yeah,
things, and to see that actually we're not against each other. It's not a competition, but sometimes it is a competition. Then we go, oh well, they have to play by the rules.
yeah,
But it, I think why I gravitated towards common knowledge, and why I think people listening might really enjoy, even feel a sense lighter, is that it's kind of um taking the obvious um I don't know, errors, obvious ways in which the society is not thriving, and taking a step back and saying, okay, well, how how can we come back to understanding that we all can contribute in our own way, and And then that's the essence of a community, right? That there are people
Yeah.
that are good at this, there are people that are good at that, and we have a room for people.
Yeah.
And so what if somebody is better than you at nearly everything? It doesn't mean that you're not more than deserving of your place in the community.
Yeah.
And
I
I
think,
maybe,
sorry.
sorry, you go on.
No, 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 sorry. I was just going to say what kind of brings up for me is it's also not pigeonholing people because,
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
it's so easy to and I to sort of say, okay, well, you're good at that, so you should just stick to that. And it means they're never invited out
Yeah.
of that space to try something else. And, there's
Mm,
definitely conversations of, and I'm not even saying this on a gender basis, but, someone who's a brilliant cook, they'll always be like in the kitchen. But actually, you need to encourage those people to have a go at other things as well. Maybe they don't want to, but at least you're
yeah.
opening the doors rather than saying you found that one and you fit, that's it. I think it's being able to always realize that there are other skills that you can try your hand at. And, I
Mm-hmm.
build, but I don't build, 5 days a week, you know, throughout the whole year. I go through different phases of it. But that's, and so therefore,
Okay.
why do I need to say that I am a builder? I can build. Sometimes I am a builder. But should we not, are we not now? But like, do you know what I mean? Like, why can't the sort of, and I know it's kind of made fun of people having sort of lots of kind of slash jobs, but I think
Mm-hmm.
we're all more than just like one identification. And rather than just being like that
Mm,
person does that, it's why can't we make that into they do that and this and they are a whole load of different parts to their existence. And I
mm,
guess what common knowledge does is allow people to have a go at all those different skills that they've potentially wanted to have a go at. They might even still, you know, be shit at it, but it doesn't really matter. Like, I remember actually, I've always loved short courses, and I always did a lot of short courses in London. And I remember doing a ceramics course, and I was like, that's it. This is
mm-hmm.
going to be my career. I'm going to be a ceramicist. And I was like, I'm going to make everyone's like birthday presents, and Christmas presents, and wedding presents, and like they're going to be amazing. And I remember like
Mm-hmm.
sitting down and having a go, and I was like, I am rubbish at this. Like, no one's ever gonna want like any of the stuff that I made. But I enjoyed doing it so much. I didn't care. I just loved working with my hands, and I loved the clay, and I
Mm-hmm.
loved the whole experience, and chatting to people as you're doing it, and celebrating, you know, the successes and the downfalls of what came out of the kiln at the end, where you're like, you know, it's all part of it. And in essence, does it really matter?
Mm-hmm.
I mean, with the building, you do want it to stand up and you don't want it to leak and you don't want it to be drafty. So there are certain things that you really don't want to make mistakes with. But I think that's where it, with confidence and knowledge and people sharing that, you know, that's achievable.
Yeah. And I think the knock-on effect of even what you're talking about is a kind of grander, more holistic perspective on just like life sounds too grand, but essentially life, right? Just a grander perspective on what is needed, what I can actually do, what other people can do, and how we can work together. I have this reflection that you might enjoy where I was talking to my friend who's studying a PhD,
Mm.
and I asked him what did he think of his professors, and he says that they're the most educated fools he's ever met. And he said that because these people are so knowledgeable in one area
Yeah.
that whenever they look at other aspects of life, it's always coming through that perspective, which is incredibly limiting, and it doesn't allow you, or at least makes it so much harder for you to see that it's all interconnected, right? That we need
Mm.
them all. They all work off each other, all feed off each other.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. I mean, 100%. And I
Yeah.
think that it's,
And
you only kind of realize that the more and more you delve into that, of realizing quite how all these things have, and yeah, have an effect on everything that you do and the people that you're with. And
mm,
yeah.
mm. But I know you said that common knowledge is moving away from tiny homes next year, but I did kind of want to make a little bit of time in the podcast for tiny homes.
Oh, absolutely.
Um, Great, because um, I'd imagine that pretty much everyone listening is probably somehow struggling with the cost of living and the energy prices and prospects for renting and buying houses in the future. Um, but then they might hear of a tiny home and just think that's like a YouTube dream or it's just unrealistic
Hmm.
and I could never get used to this. So I'd like for you to kind of not like pitch tiny homes, but I kind of want to spend a few minutes maybe either destigmatizing tiny homes and talk to me about your experience or people you know experiences in tiny homes.
I guess this goes back again to like America being really good about sort of doing this sort of stuff of living in mobile homes, but then also their kind of small home or tiny home phenomenon, um, and how popular they are over there. And it is trickier in Ireland and in the UK because of all the planning permissions and like what you can and can't do. And so I guess there's two sides to it. There's the legal aspects of what you're permitted to build, and different parts of Ireland it's different rules. But on the whole, like if you're on wheels, then it needs to move. Um, yeah, I can't remember what it is off the top of my head, but it's sort of X amount of meters per couple of months to make sure that it's not like static, basically, if you don't have planning permission.
Okay.
Um, and
Okay.
so and it all varies of what exactly you're allowed to do. Um, so yeah, it depends on like the size, what the use is, what the foundations are, all of it. So
Okay.
that's a whole nother concept of like depending on where you want to live and what kind of land you have access to, it's going to be different as to whether you need what kind of planning permission you need to get. Um, Whereas the actual concept of living in a tiny home, I think is so great. I am absolutely a hoarder, but all the reasons that I kind of think basically I just don't want to throw anything away because I'm like maybe one day this will be useful. But
Yeah.
and so there's one thing about don't chuck stuff out, and then there's another thing of like it comes to a point where you're like no you do. Um, there's only so much that you can hold on to, and I guess the thing
Yeah.
with the tiny home is the simplicity of not having to have so many belongings and the beauty in that because you have to live in it um day to day with just the items that you need and really just and I think there becomes something even more poetic about that than being a hoarder and hanging on to everything, but making sure that everything that's in your life has a purpose right from the very beginning and only the necessary things are in
Mm,
your vicinity. And so I think there's something very peaceful about that. It's a bit like staying in, I want to say like a hotel room or someone's, if they have one, a spare room where there's nothing in there and it's just a
mm.
bed. And there's something, and you suddenly are like, wow, I slept so well because you're not surrounded by like unnecessary crap that we all kind of have.
Yeah.
And I think that the tiny home is a really sort of just shows that you don't need to
Nice
have
antidote.
huge, yeah, and it just shows you don't have to have like a huge amount of space. I think there's actually something incredibly luxurious just to have really good examples of, the best type of scissors. Don't know why I thought scissors, but you know what I mean? Like really beautiful objects that you really enjoy using every single day, like they feel luxurious, rather than having like a whole cascade of stuff that you're like you feel overwhelmed by. Um, anyway, the tiny home for us was it's something that we can build in a week, the structure of it, and put in the windows and the doors. And so
Okay.
it's a great example of actually what you can do in a very small period of time because we're not even building all day every day. There's there's theory in the mornings and then it's building in the afternoons. So that's actually 5 afternoons really of of building. And then the interiors we were kind of done with our level two students, and then with our carpenters and teachers who did the really kind of finessing. But the actual shell of it can be done very simply in a matter of days. And I think that's the other beautiful thing is that you don't need you need a couple of people to help you move things and climb up onto ladders or scaffolding, whatever you've got. But it's very attainable to be able to make that shell. Once you then decide what you put in it, that's up to you. I'm just like dreaming in my own little world of how I'd love to live in a tiny home. But the thing that is making it more complicated are the planning permission. Um,
Okay. And
and
Spider,
yeah,
like on practical terms, a few kind of questions that came to me when I
mm,
told people I was having this conversation.
oh
One
yeah.
was the fact that, say, Ireland and England, very wet countries, and, and what is the kind of longevity of these tiny homes?
I mean, really, they've got like the longevity of like any other, um, you know, shed building or any other extension or anything.
Hmm.
The tiny home that we have photographed the most and has got the most publicity is covered in hemp, and the material it was
Okay.
the hemp was grown in the UK, and it's been made into corrugated panels that were shipped over here. And you need to oil it and you need to look after it once a year, like you would with wood or some other materials that you might want to clad it in. Um, we were really excited about it because of just it's hemp. I mean, and it's beautiful corrugated hemp, and it's really beautiful up close. You can see all the fibers and everything in it. Um, and because these are prototypes, the hemp panels, they have said kind of 20 years that they'll last. But I think that's really like anything. It depends how
Okay.
much you look after it. As the actual tiny home in Ireland and how long it will last, it really should last for as long as, you know, someone's living in it and caring for it. And obviously on the west coast, it's going to be getting a lot more wind and
Very windy.
a lot more harsh environments than other parts of Ireland. But I don't know. I mean, I think that I can't put a number like a set amount in it. I think this is like any kind of back garden shed that it will be there for as long as you want it to be there if you look after it.
Okay. Thanks for that, Spider. One other one was about heat.
Yeah.
I mean, obviously we're winter now. Uh, like uh, how obviously it depends on the installation, right? But the standard tiny home, are
So
they
yeah,
can they
so for
sorry.
these tiny homes, they were originally designed to
Hmm.
have like a little stove, and they can still like be kitted out with a stove, and that's fine. But we then suddenly thought, actually, you know what? In this particular space, as soon as you've got a stove on and it's bloody hot, you're actually then cutting off quite a lot of space that can actually be used. And during the summer
Okay.
and during like autumn, until I mean, I left what 2 weeks ago, and they were still like cozy inside from like the big windows, actually allowing and the sun that is around to like warm up the inside. But they're really thick cork panels, and it's just like any room. The more it's like once it's sealed in tight, and you've got someone moving around, cooking, doing what we do in a home, it heats up the space. But there are other really cool little. I mean, you could put an electric heater in as well. Um, but there
Okay.
are like so many other little ways to heat it that I love, which I've seen in a friend's houseboat before, where you can put little tea lights inside a terracotta pot, an upside terracotta pot on top. There's a like two terracotta pots on top of each other with a little tea light, and it basically heats up that ceramic, and it kind of becomes just like a warm radiator basically. So there are all these like simple ways to make a space warm without having to use like your normal ways of heating a room or traditional ways of heating a room.
Okay. Okay.
And I guess that's
Ah,
kind of what I've
beautiful.
kind
Thanks
of
for that, Spider.
I love all these little like off-grid tips that should be more well known basically.
Hmm. Well, you're sharing the knowledge now.
Yeah, well there you go. Just the start. And I need other people's knowledge to keep on teaching me.
But before we move into like the closing section of the
Mm.
podcast, one I wanted to ask, is there something that you would like to say that I kind of haven't asked you about that you feel is important for the listeners to know?
Um uh it's really one of those moments that afterwards I'm really like, oh God, I wish I'd discussed that. Um, yeah. At the moment, I feel like I've sort of been just, don't know, sure there's gonna be some really wise words that I will be able to think of, but no, at the moment, no. I guess, I guess I'm always curious, and this isn't necessarily, I'm now asking actually your listeners something, um, because
Hmm.
I guess what is part of you know there's all my interests and that's kind of part of like what we're bringing forward, and I guess I'm always interested in like what are the things that other people want to learn about and understand and know more of, because I think this is kind of what this is not kind
Hmm.
of this is exactly what we're trying to do, is actually make it a meeting place for people to come and learn and share skills, and I guess
Hmm.
to open up that conversation, it's inviting other people to put forward what they want to be in that conversation and what it is they would want to discuss or learn about more. And, you know, I think, with our building, we started off with tiny homes, we did stone cottage renovations, and then we did an extension. And that was sort of answering questions that we had from people who knew that we were building. And as we're moving into this sort of mending, making, growing phase, which is starting for us to have to look more outside what we know and what um, it's expanding our conversation. Is I'm asking, I guess, listeners what it is that they want to know more about to make themselves feel like they're
Okay.
living a more sustainable life, and being able to take control more of their own life. And that's living situations or feeding themselves or growing or whatever it is that they feel that they want to branch out into.
And would it be, is it, are common knowledge open to receiving, emails from people about, oh, hey, I would love if you could do a workshop on X.
Totally.
Are common knowledge open to receiving that?
Absolutely. Yeah, yeah, yeah. Would love
There.
that.
Absolutely. Okay.
Yeah.
Fantastic. Great.
Why? What
Well,
would you? What
I'll be
would you
sure to
have?
leave the link.
What would you have? I'm going to ask.
Sorry.
Turn it back on. I'm going to turn it back on you. What would your dream? What would you love to learn besides building?
Oh, it's a tough question on the
Spring it
spot.
on you right at the last
Um,
minute.
what would I like to learn? Um, I I think I don't think there's one thing. I think what you mentioned before struck me in the sense that to give someone the encouragement and the education around using your hands. And so it's not necessarily that I'd like, this is my answer now. It's not necessarily that I think I'd like a workshop on this right now, but I
Mm,
think I would like to be in a position where, like you said before, if I'm in a position to, I'm working on a shed, or my friend's working on a shed, or he's working on something that my opinion is asked, or if they're talking, that I could give some sort of input, and to not kind of just um skip or be mute in that conversation and just say, oh well, that I have nothing to input here, and
mm,
also there's no point in me even listening. It doesn't really matter to me. Um, I think just to be able to be in a position where, you know, to be to be somewhat capable with your hands in that regard, and to have had the experience of to have had the experience within a community setting, I think would be very enriching. If there if there's something in particular, I'll definitely let you know.
no, but I
But
like that because I think you're right.
right,
I think that it's
yeah.
like it's easier. I mean, we all take in and remember information in different ways, and the one of which
Hmm.
you're, learning and making and seeing and doing, it kind of imprints it into your memory bank. Like it's almost indelible after that because you can kind of envision it on so many levels once you've done it yourself in with a group of people, with
Mm,
by yourself, whatever it is. But I think this is where like learning, so many people hate school for obvious reasons that it's an old, style of teacher students. And I think
hmm.
that at the more that we're all appreciating to use your hands and learn by doing, it's really allowing people to move at the pace that they need to, and 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 yeah,
Yeah.
and keep that memory bank, so they can
Mm,
keep on replicating it in the future.
definitely, definitely. Moving on, Spider.
Yeah.
There's a new addition to the Earthly Delights podcast, and you were the first guest to receive this question.
Oh, good.
I want to ask you, what lesson is the universe teaching you right now?
mm, Without giving you like a really long in depth um therapy session of what I'm trying to learn, I
Hmm.
guess um one of the things that I'm learning is about prioritizing, and I think
Okay.
this is a huge amount of what I guess I before I kind of embarked on this sort of stage of building, um and my sort of diagnosis with ADHD. I think what I'm now having
Hmm.
to learn again is how to manage time, and whether that's like work and people. I'm back in front of a computer basically a lot more than this winter than I had been for a long time, and I think it's funny how the universe will continually give you lessons until you've learnt them or stopped pushing them
Yeah.
under a rug and be like, I'll do this another time because eventually you have to take it out of the rug and address it. And
Yeah.
I think that's sort of life lessons with friends, loved ones, romantic relationships, work colleagues, but I think it's also so many own like behavioral patterns. And so I think prioritizing is the one that I'm just to keep it vague and without having to give you too many details. I think
Yeah,
that's my
yeah, no.
particular one that is also realizing that I guess trying to enjoy the pattern of those life lessons of how they keep on
Mm,
they'll
I
bring
like
them
that.
they'll raise their head up every so often just to make sure that you haven't forgotten about them. Yeah.
Hmm. Yeah, I like how life doesn't care if you think you've learned the lesson. It's still
Yeah.
going to keep on showing you the lesson.
Yeah. Yeah. Just in a different roundabout way. And I guess it's understanding that, acknowledging it and learning each time, isn't it?
Yeah. Mm. I remember a few years ago when I was volunteering in Denmark, we kind of had this workshop um, on prioritization, and it was a kind of cool lesson because basically they ask you, they say, okay, what are the most important things in your life? And like, how would you rank them, right? And so people would say, family and health and friends and purpose. And then they would ask you to draw a pizza or a pie, and they would say, okay, well, how much of your time is actually being devoted to these things that you
Mm,
have listed as your top priorities? And it's kind of like a big eye opener because pretty much everyone, I think, well, definitely me, I was like, oh God, well, I say family's super important, but and may it's very hard in the world that we live, but I do think it's a powerful exercise to, like you said, just really come back to priorities and
yeah.
how are we spending our time?
Yeah, absolutely. I might have to try that
Yeah.
exercise, see what it comes up with for me.
Let me know how it goes.
Yeah, will do. Oh dear.
Okay, well, this has been great, Spider. Thanks so much for your time.
No,
Uh,
it's been lovely to chat to you.
I really, yeah, it has, and I admire the work you guys are doing. And all going well, I will be able to visit you next spring
Do,
in County
yes.
Clare.
Yes.
Um, and I'll provide the link to your website in the show notes. And I know you guys are looking for volunteers as well for the next spring. Am I right?
Yeah, we are. We're looking for volunteers, first of all, with helping us get the site ready for the courses. And that's going to be doing lots of
Okay,
odd jobs all over the place. But then also looking for volunteers who are going to be wanting to help during the courses actually on site. So there's going to be lots of opportunities for people to come in lots of capacities.
great,
Yeah,
great. Well, I'm sure we'll have a few listeners now that are interested in reaching out and spending a week or two in County Clare with the crew.
great. Look forward to it.
Fingers crossed.
Yeah,
So thanks again, Spider, and yeah, hopefully I'll see you next spring.
perfect. Brilliant.